The UK goes to vote. Will Rishi Sunak's unexpected move to call early election backfire at the Conservative Party, and can the Labour think of getting the absolute majority in the British Parliament?
Now, to talk about the British parliamentary election, we're now joined by Professor Ian Begg from the European Institute at the London School of Economics to discuss some more. Welcome to the programme. Thanks for joining us. Right, so let's try and understand. I mean, if you could just tell us a little bit about these major political forces. I mean, it's sort of predicted by a lot of people that the Conservatives might now finally be at the end of their political 14 years. I'm curious about maybe what kind of impact you see happening. Any surprises? Nigel Farage with his reform parties in the mix. What are some outcomes for later on in the night or early in the morning?
Well, if you believe the huge number of polls that have been done, the outcome is going to be a very strong majority for the Labour Party. This is partly the result of the British system of first past the post, which means that in a constituency with multiple candidates, the candidate that receives the highest share of the vote is the one who is elected. And it's perfectly possible that Labour could win a massive majority with less than 40% of the aggregate votes because of the way the distribution of votes happens. You mentioned reform. Reform is a right or even far right party which is bidding for the same constituents as the Conservative Party, so they're eating each other. If reform takes 10 or 12 or 15% of the votes, most of those votes will come from the Conservative voters. And that means that the Conservatives have a much lower chance of winning against Labour. And this is one of the reasons we're expecting a very strong majority for Labour. Reform itself, again, because of this first past the post system, even if it obtains, as I said, 10 or even as much as 15% of the vote, may end up with hardly any seats in the Parliament because the system is biased against the smaller parties.
Professor Begg, I'm wondering what psychological mechanism will work today, whether people will vote for those leading in polls, thus adding to the, to the victory of the Labour Party, or rather they'll vote against it, they mobilise against it, thus weakening the victors. So what do you think will happen?
Well, again, there's a couple of things to take into account here. First is there's been so much propaganda about how big a majority Labour is going to win that you might think some potential Labour supporters will think, well, why should I bother to go to vote? It's not compulsory. They're going to win anyway, and it's not going to make any difference if I do vote. And the second thing that comes into this is that the number of constituencies which can be regarded as safe is much higher for Labour than it is for the Conservatives. Many traditional Conservative seats are very vulnerable to the three-way contests or even four-way contests, if you count the centrist Liberal Party, because they will squeeze the non-Labour vote in a way which gives a victory to Labour. So it's a complicated scenario about why the victory seems still to be extremely likely for Labour. Now, it's possible the polls are wildly wrong. Possible, but I would say it's an infinitesimally small probability that Labour won't win a big victory.
Mm-hmm. Also, what we're also wondering, not just for our region here in Central Europe, but obviously Ukraine. I mean, the Conservative government of the last years has been very much a close partner of NATO, a close partner of Kiev. What kind of partner would a Labour government be for Kiev and NATO?
I think I can sum that up in one word or two words: no change. You've already seen the leader of the Labour Party meeting Volodymyr Zelensky during the D-Day celebrations. He's made it very clear that he continues to have a strong position. In fact, it's important to say that there are many aspects of UK policy that won't change radically because of the likely election of a Labour government. Much of foreign policy is unlikely to change. There are some aspects of social policy that won't change. Both parties are very committed to retaining a strong health service, for example. So it's more on some of the economic policies and certain other social policies that you'll see the differences between the parties.
You mentioned health surveys. Cost of living, health service and housing were the hot topics of this year's campaign in the UK. Who had prepared a better and more comprehensive programme to reach the undecided?
Well, I think that Labour has done better on this because it's persuaded particularly those who are finding it so difficult to obtain housing, that they at least have a plan for constructing a much larger number of houses than the last 14 years of a Conservative government have been able to achieve. It may well be that they'll be sending recruiting teams to Poland to try to bring back the Polish bricklayers and builders who left the UK after Brexit. I have to say to some of your compatriots in Poland that we'd be very welcome in what's likely to be a big building spree. The other thing Labour is promising to do is to ease the land use planning restrictions which have inhibited the investment both in housing and in various forms of infrastructure. It's something which the UK recognises as a major problem. But so far, the balance of power on this has been with those residents who say, to use a famous expression, NIMBY, not in my backyard. They oppose new developments. And that's one of the things that Labour hopes it can change to make it far more difficult to oppose new developments.
One topic that also has been talked about, I think perhaps has been put to rest, but still, I think, when we heard some of those commentaries by young voters, a desire for the UK potentially to return into the European Union. Now, where do we stand here with a potential Labour victory, or even a Conservative victory? Is this now a done deal? Is there any way that this could be amended or changed? How does the future look in this regard?
This time, one word, no. There is no appetite among any of the parties who could produce the next Prime Minister, and certainly from the Labour Party, to reopen the Brexit trauma. And Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, has said he cannot see any prospect of rejoining the European Union or even the single market in his lifetime. He's 60, so you can make your own calculation about how long that means.
Right. Lastly, I'd like to ask you about the youngest voters in France, where we also have snap elections taking place right now. Many footballers of the national team and other sports stars took part in the campaign. Did the same thing happen in the UK?
It didn't. Maybe the English football team is so concerned about its poor performances in the Euros that they're concentrating on doing rather better when they have to face Switzerland at the weekend. I think it's been a campaign in this country which has been almost entirely led by the politicians, with some input from think tank specialists. For example, there's on the question of public finances, there's been a lot of reference to a very well respected think tank called the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which has been trying to cost the different parties' programs. But no, not so much footballers. Some actors and some other cultural figures have been involved. But the footballers seem to be concentrating on what they're doing in Germany.
Maybe that's for better, as you said.
Right. So I think we'll still wait for those results. Brits are still voting, so we'll have more results obviously later into the night and early in the morning to see which way that the British electorate has chosen.
Yeah,
Look,
I think
well, thank you so much.
The conclusion you can take it is that there's a strong sentiment of time for a change.
Right. Understood.
And that pervades every other policy issue.
We'll see what that change will look like later on tonight and in the morning. Professor Ian Begg there, thank you so much for your insights. Much appreciated.
Thank you.